16-year-old climate activist is the topic of many headlines following a passionate speech at the United Nations. Greta Thunberg from Sweden joined 15 other children from across the world to represent an official human rights complaint on the climate crisis. Here's some of what she had to say.
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Of course, Team Rising is back to weigh in on this and other things as well. Roger Fisk, Democratic strategist, and former Congressman Jack Kingston. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Jack, let me start with you. I mean, what do you, from your ideological lens, from your positioning, like when you see Greta making that case, what is your emotional response?
Just ignore it. She's a 16-year-old, and then she really doesn't have much to offer in terms of here's the policy on nuclear energy, here's why fossil fuels should be ruled out, and by the way, here's the mass extinction, here's the species I can name. She can't do that because she's 16, so you know, my view is I'm glad she's out there. It takes a lot of nerve as a 16-year-old to
I mean, you have to give her credit.
Nobody should be disparaging her.
She launched a global movement. Many other people have tried to galvanize around this issue before, and Roger, she's the one that was able to do it. So she's tapping into something here very effectively.
I think I very much, and what frustrates me, Jack, is the same thing, which is I'm like, Greta, you believe this is a mass extinction event, and yet her group called out 5 different nations yesterday at the United Nations. Not one of them was China, which is the largest carbon emitter. If this is a mass extinction global crisis, we only have 11 years, then the logical solution to that is we should nuke China, right? But guess what? I mean, that's not what is actually being proposed, and obviously it shouldn't be proposed. We have to talk as people who work in politics. I do not mean that literally, but I'm saying if you accept that type of rhetoric, if you accept that type of framing, then that means that we are in an existential mass extinction event, and we must do extreme things in order to solve it. And so, Roger, as somebody who's been in this for a long time, you've probably heard these types of speeches. Whenever the ideology meets the policy, and that clashing there, how do you deal with it? Because as somebody who's been in the party infrastructure, I'm sure you've heard similar impassioned pleas. Now, in order to execute on that, you actually have to come up with some real policy ideas, and we haven't heard that.
I take 1 or 2 issues with the congressman's points, which is, I actually think she could go through the policy steps, and she actually could go through the species that are impacted, but that wasn't necessarily the point of that exercise yesterday. I can't sit here and not say something about the current occupant of the White House. The idea that this individual, with everything that's going on, finds the time to take a swipe at a 16-year-old girl and obliquely reference her mental health issues, to me, in a long, long line of things that I find extremely underwhelming and frankly just mean from this individual. It's so disappointing that this is a priority for the president to take a swipe at it. And I won't even get it into Dinesh because he's just not a serious individual. The passion around this and the steps required, I hear your point about China, but one of the things that I've learned, and I hold on to it and it gets reaffirmed every day, is you can't let other people determine your standards, right? We can't, as America, just sit here and say, well, there's female genital mutilation in that country, so we'll allow it. And China's not doing that, so why should we? The whole idea of this country is the marriage between the individual and the commonwealth, and that we determine a course of action that, for the most part, throughout our history, has set our sights higher than most other countries. Now, if you're comfortable just lowering those sights to accommodate the lowest common denominator in other countries, that's okay. I'm not. And we've said this before here. There's plenty of real estate between the 40-yard lines on this issue where America could be A, leading, and B, profiting. if we really embrace this, because I've done, when I was in the Obama administration, we did a lot of trade missions, and when we went through China and India, guess who we were getting contracts for? American companies that build water filtration plants, American companies that retrofit buildings.
Sure.
These massive economies.
Joe Biden's son, I have to
These massive economies. If you'd like to roll up your sleeves and get into that, I'm more than happy to.
Not today.
We relegated it too much.
But I'll just finish this, which is these massive economies are waking up to what they need to do. We could be positioning ourselves as leaders in this and actually benefiting economically, but instead there's a vacuum.
I mean, Greta is a voice of moral clarity. And I think she has all the details to back it up. She's an incredibly informed young woman with great agency who has launched a global movement. But it's also not her job to say, this is exactly how you're supposed to do it. It's the job of policymakers. And I would say that we've seen many, Sanders, Warren, and others, AOC, who have stepped up the plate to fill in those details. I got to speak yesterday with Jane Goodall, who is just amazing. And I asked her about Greta and about the agency of youth activists and what their role is in changing this world. Take a listen to what she had to say.
Well, the young people altogether give me hope. I began our youth program, Roots and Shoots, back in '91, and we got about 100,000 or even 150,000 active groups around the world of all ages, and every group is choosing 3 projects to make the world better, one for people, one for animals, one for the environment. And they are changing the world through taking action. Every child is passionate because they're doing something that they really care about.
Right. It was interesting, and by the way, that full interview will air tomorrow exclusively here, so don't miss it, guys. She gets into Trump, she talks about capitalism, she went way more political than I actually expected, so it's interesting. But she also talks about how she will speak to children and they will persuade their parents. And I think that's also part of what's happening here, Jack, is these young people are persuading the adults in the room that this is a crisis that they need to take seriously.
That's, I understand.
Yeah.
I listen to my 4 children quite often, but having sat in legislative chambers for 30 years and made decisions that have to do with traffic or military or healthcare or climate, you usually get people who know about nuclear energy, who know about fossil fuels, who know about the economy. And hyperbole like mass extinctions, it saddens me that some adult planted that seed into her brain.
But there are a million species that are in danger of extinction right now. So the science may be hyperbolic, but it's also real.
Species that have ever existed on Earth are already gone. So, this is.
I'd like to see the science on that, but I can tell you, capitalism has been the foremost in America. You talk about leadership. We have brought down our emissions, and we have done a lot for environmental protectionism, and we've done it without government policy.
Well,
no, because I want to build on.
I want to segue to capitalism.
I want to build on this very quickly. Since Earth Day in 1970, which was young people who we were just saying shouldn't have a role in this, $30 trillion have been spent differently based on environmental awareness. So my point in that, and I'm somewhat agreeing with you, is that the market has actually done much more for the environmental movement than government policy in a lot of ways. But it was young people that started that. So to sit here and say 16 and 17-year-olds don't have a role in this, I think is disingenuous.
And I think that Jack is saying that as well.
Saying that. I think it's disingenuous for you to say that. I mean, what I'm saying is that if you're making serious policy, you don't put a 16-year-old out there on the same pedestal that you would have put
what you're trying to say is that they need to backfill this with seriousness in order to back that up. And I have not yet seen evidence of that, and I've talked about it a lot on the show.
We got a lot of policy on the table.
That's true.
Now.
But we should also go to Bernie Sanders. He has come out with a very new, radical, millionaire tax, or I think ultra-millionaire tax, far outdoing Elizabeth Warren. He has a tweet that we can put up on the screen. He says, billionaires should not exist. Crystal, do we have a little bit of the details of the plan?
Yeah, so basically, this is Sanders' version of a wealth tax, but as you said, it goes further than Warren's. It's more aggressive, and actually for the average billionaire, look, this wouldn't eliminate billionaires, but for the average billionaire, their wealth would be cut in half over the next 15 years. It also raises, obviously, dramatically more money than Warren's plan would raise. Roger, look, we haven't done any polling on this yet, but I can tell you, a wealth tax every time it's polled, is tremendously popular because people feel, and rightfully so based on the numbers, that you've got a tiny sliver of Americans who are getting all the goodies and everybody else is getting left out.
We've touched on this a couple times.
Yeah.
First off, if he had not put that moronic title on top of that tweet and just said, let's return to Eisenhower level of taxes, he could have gotten to the same place without
Yeah, but you put that on there and then everybody's eyes glaze over and no one cares.
Right.
This is a moral case about the distribution of wealth in this country, and he makes it with clarity. I think that matters.
We'll see if it matters. But both parties have kind of a conflicted relationship with some of what they present as their core values. So, for example, Democrats want everyone to succeed, but then they'll turn around and be leery of success. Republicans say that everyone should have free choice, but then are very resistant to when people choose something that's different than Republican orthodoxy. So that to me is very interesting.
I'm not leery of success. I am leery of the idea that some people deserve to be billionaires and some people who work 2 jobs still cannot afford to have a family and make ends meet.
Yeah, but
that's what I'm leery of.
That doesn't mean billionaires don't have to exist, right? Like you can live in a society.
Which is my point. I mean, I think he dramatically simplified, like that tweet, if he was just talking about policy and his tax ideas, I think would have had much longer legs and been much more accurate and possibly even arguably more persuasive.
Nobody would talk about it.
Wait, we're running out of time here. Final response from Jack. And
I do want to talk about some bipartisan.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Because I do think there's some hyperbole also with 70 or octogenarians, whatever he is. Tonight, bipartisan congressional football game, 7 o'clock, Gallaudet University. Herschel Walker will be playing, John Booty, Ken Harvey.
Yes.
It's a bipartisan race. It's $300,000 to charity.
Awesome.
Roger and I will be sitting next to each other.
That's right.
Fabulous.
That's right.
I love it.
That is how bipartisan
Thank you,
we've
guys.
gotten.
Appreciate you both.
Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Tomorrow on Rising, you can YouTuber Michael Brooks. He's going to discuss all things 2020.
And more of my conversation with Dr. Jane Goodall. It was great. You won't want to miss what she says about capitalism and the environment. As always, follow us on all the social channels. Send us your Rising questions to #RisingQs and subscribe to our YouTube channel and get the notifications and all that good stuff. We love reading your comments. Thank you guys for watching.
Bye.
Have a great day.